So hi, I'm Phil Davies and I'm the CEO at FlyForm. My role within the organisation is setting the strategic direction of the company, embedding our culture in our employees and what we do day to day, and ensuring we uphold our standards for quality.
I'm Stephen Williams. I'm a senior technical consultant with FlyForm and I'm specialising in the ITOM product line.
The CMDB is often misunderstood, and I think that that's a journey that the CMDB's gone through over the past few years. We consider it, and I think people are starting to agree with us, that it's very much the heartbeat of what an organisation's IT department as a minimum does. It really is the foundation that underpins all the kind of IT processes, as I say, as a minimum, the IT processes, and quite often these days, other processes like facilities, HR, security, they can all be underpinned by the quality, the completeness and the kind of content that's within the CMDB today. What the CMDB is at a high level is essentially a very rich database of the assets that underpin your IT services. But the crucial point with a good CMDB is that it also contains the relationships between those devices and gives you a holistic view of what's making up the business services that you offer your customers today, and how they interact with each other.
Yeah, so as you say, with the CMDB being the heart of an organisation, it really needs that ongoing nurturing and a process there to support that. It's a living, breathing thing that really can bring huge benefits to an organisation when it's implemented well.
Yeah, definitely. I think we've seen it in the past, and we still see it today, where people think they'll put this in, get it all done, and even if they do a great job of that first phase, if there's no processes there to underpin it afterward and no kind of resources looking after things and checking it and improving it, you soon end up with all your CIs kind of out of date, not being found or whatever, and the value just diminishes significantly from there. So I think the CMDB's got a few kind of critical roles and benefits it brings, even at a very basic level. I think the kind of the basic features. One, I mean, the one we always talk about with our clients is the impact analysis, isn't it? So there's a P1 incident happened, what's affected in terms of our business services, and how do we pinpoint the root cause of this issue? But also from a change perspective as well. If you've got a big complex IT environment, people are making changes, they're submitting changes, you don't know what the impact is on the front line.
Of course, yeah.
And hopefully a rich CMDB gives you the kind of visibility of being able to make educated decisions on those risks and impacts.
Yeah, yeah.
And not doing those could mean huge costs of, literally monetary losses.
And you have your compliance side of things as well, where, you need to make sure that your CIs are compliant against any audits that you may be subject to as an organisation.
Yeah, we see that a lot in regulated industries especially, for example, financial services, we know the banks need to know where their kit is, what's running on that kit, what patch levels it is for various reasons.
Exactly, yeah.
And we see that a lot. I think the third kind of main component then is the cost optimization, so kind of branching into asset management, which is a kind of subset of config management really. But we've seen huge savings from clients today getting on top of their asset management in terms of kit that's out there they don't know about, things maybe that are on support that don't need to be, duplication of equipment, warehouses and stockrooms full of stuff, and
we see it all, don't we?
Yeah, and the software asset part of that as well. So those licenses in terms of those costs too. Yeah.
So having the visibility against all of that, and then to be able to manage it from one single source, and gain that control is huge.
Yeah, and so I think the other key point there is a lot of organisations we see tend to have either old systems or old ways of managing this data that's out there with all the kind of legacy estates they've got, but there's never a joined up view, as you just talked about, this kind of unified single kind of view. And I think that can be another key driver for people to get a handle on old and new, bring them all together, get into a single place, and then really drive the value out of what they're trying to achieve. Because if any of those bits are missing and you don't have a complete picture, as we know, then the value starts to significantly drop off any kind of investment in it. So
I think unless you have trust in your CMDB implementation, then the value of it is really, really diminished significantly. So we see in old world implementations where we have manual updates, heavy reliance on human input, manual updates going in to populate the CMDB, whereas what we see and what we're able to implement is an automated discovery that really drives down the need for any manual input.
Yeah, definitely. I think I remember a place I was working a number of years ago, and we had it was called the CMDB. It was an asset register and an ITSM tool, but
Yeah.
it was difficult to maintain anyway. So we then it didn't have any relationship data. So it was very much a kind of list of the network, and we built a really complex spreadsheet to maintain these kind of relationships and give us kind of some handle on impact analysis. But that was reliant on the engineers fitting stuff, which was happening many times a day, giving you those updates. So they're telling you they'd actually change something, which could be as simple as a cable in a port. And then when you've got that information, you're relying on the person receiving that email to then actually make sure they actually go and update it in the spreadsheet, and then you're on the right version. And you only need one or two issues like that where your data's wrong and you lose the confidence in it, and you also don't notify the right customer or something, and there's egg on your face. And it kind of just undermines the whole process, doesn't it? And,
and what you could have done was just deploy Discovery and had those things automatically populated for you. Yeah,
and we kind of started moving toward the end of that. It was kind of a 5-year project, and we were kind of getting there, but we still weren't at the point where it was automated and as slick as it could have been. So yeah, I think we see it all the time, don't we? Where, in fact, I would almost say everyone we speak to has at least had a try at the CMDB, in quotes, in some shape or form. And that maybe they've loaded a static data file 2 years ago. Or we've even seen customers where we've had a reasonable initial investment in setting up a CMDB in terms of suppliers providing files and integrations, as we know with one of our clients. But the processes then haven't been governed properly, or someone's gone sick.
Everything falls down from there.
Yeah, and you end up 3 months in, and that's not done. And I think that what that does is cultivates this perception that CMDB is this unicorn somewhere that no one can have.
It's like a nirvana that they think is so unattainable, whereas actually what we find with the right approach, the implementation of it, and to get that success story is really straightforward.
Yeah. And it can actually be a lot shorter time frame than people think, can't it?
Absolutely.
Obviously there are cases out there where there are huge, complex projects, but generally getting that structure right at the start, the design, going through the right phase steps,
the design is huge.
Can really help. And I think where a lot of people also come into trouble is some of these projects, they are an investment, and some of those investments are large. And when you're trying to convince a finance director or CFO or something of the spend, and you can't quite communicate those business benefits you're going to get afterward, that's where we see a lot of clients struggling. So we always try and get in with them and actually look at what business benefits we think they can find, do a business value assessment and actually help them drive that case back into the business to say, look, we're going to invest this, but these are the tangible and non-tangible benefits we're going to get, and we're going to do it in this time frame that we've committed to. These are the FlyForm top tips for your CMDB design and implementation. Tip number 1, for me, business goals. So always start off your CMDB design process and workshops thinking from the business perspective as opposed to the technical perspective.
You don't want to get bogged down in the technical aspects.
No, like attributes, schemas, data sources. Really try and focus in on, are we trying to save money here? Do we not know what's in our estate? Are we able to conduct impact analysis? Why are we here in this room doing this project? There must be a pain point somewhere that has a customer impact or a business impact. Let's understand what that is and make sure everyone in the room understands what that is, so we're all kind of aligned to the same thing as we try and design what this thing should look like and why, and give us that good reference point.
Yeah, agreed. So I think it's important to remember your data model in the design phase of the CMDB as well. So you want to know how granular do you actually want to get with your CIs? Where do you want to pull those key pieces of information from?
Yeah, and I think we'll share a data model as part of this. You need to be understanding what are you trying to capture, which attributes against those things you're capturing, who the data owner is, what the golden source is.
And linking back to your goals, how do these attributes
how does this help us? Are we actually going to use this data, or is it just going to sit somewhere and never get maintained? If it is, get it off the model.
Exactly.
And I think the most important thing then with that data model is actually getting it physically prepared and then signed off by the stakeholders, by yourself, make sure everybody's agreed this is what we're doing before we start.
Sign off is key.
Sign off is key. So following on from that, I think governance is the next big one for me. the configuration management processes,
Yep.
and also the kind of the platform governance. If you do use discovery, you know, having the resources available to be following up on that stuff.
Yeah.
So often, again, we see people make the investment, even do the data model, we get it in, it's wonderful.
Deployed.
Yeah, and then there's no config manager role, or the person's not invested in that role.
Yeah.
It's
No
not supported by
ongoing
management. Yeah, and then 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, a year later, you've got absolute carnage and garbage in your system, and the value is completely eroded again, and you've got an expensive cleanup exercise on your hands to maintain it and get it fixed.
Yeah.
And kind of tied into that governance, I think our next tip is kind of that senior stakeholder buy-in, getting the kind of someone in the business to champion and sponsor this. Because
of course, yeah, someone senior needs to be able to get behind the implementation, really give it that importance within the organization. And again, link it back to the business goals. You know, what are we looking to achieve here?
Yeah.
And bear that in mind.
Yeah, I think there's so many stakeholders potentially in a CMDB project,
Of
especially
course,
if you're in a big organization. We've seen rooms of, 20 people, 30 people, and there's a lot of personalities, a lot of different views and challenges, and a lot of people, maybe some people care, some people don't. And if someone's not really saying, we're doing this, we have to do this, and this is why,
exactly.
You end up with a part project again and a part thing. So always make sure you've got that senior stakeholder on board and engaged.
Yeah, great. I think a good tip as well is to have a single source of truth, and it's something we hear a lot with ServiceNow. But to have all your key data in one single source goes back to that old world setup where, you know, you've got lots of disparate information in different systems. With ServiceNow, you have the benefit of being able to bring that in and manage from one single place. And obviously the integration benefits there with the ITSM processes and the wider platform. Huge.
So we're talking really there about making ServiceNow or whatever product you're using, the CMDB, making that CMDB become the single source of truth by utilising the multiple sources, but bringing them together in a nicely controlled place.
If you trust other sources, then you want that data in there.
Yeah, but then this becomes the good kind of Bible you work from day to day and operate from. Yeah. So the next tip I want to bring up is actually probably one of the most important ones in my world, because we see so many projects and people getting a meltdown, I think, over this kind of scale of work that you could embark on with the CMDB. So this tip for me is don't boil the ocean. Don't start wherever you are today and think that, you know, within the next 3 months we're going to get to this complete nirvana where everything's captured, everything's automated, you know, there's never going to be an issue, we don't have to maintain it, all these kind of things. You know, really try and take a phased approach potentially.
So, you know, start out small, take a particular business service or an environment or something like that.
And even tying it back to a particular business challenge, like you might have, say, 5 business challenges, and maybe number 1 is you don't know where your assets are, and that's causing you a lot of pain, and it's also potentially maybe from an infrastructure perspective easier to hit that one first.
Of course.
But actually just pick apart, attack that first, you know, do a phased approach, and don't try and think you're going to achieve the whole thing, because you'll soon go into huge costs, huge projects, no one wants to sign it off, everyone thinks the resources will be too much to get it done, and we see a lot of people getting a knot over that stuff.
Definitely. So I'd recommend as well, not forgetting the business services that are within the organization and how the CIs actually link back to those, how they support services.
Yeah, even if you get that bottom layer right and all the kind of physical stuff and the horizontal stuff is great. The whole point of this ideally should be to get to the point where you've got a business awareness around this. So even though it's a nice move to get from not really knowing the impact to kind of knowing, okay, from a technical perspective, the impact if I take this router down is all this stuff. But what does that mean? Am I taking my payment service down? Am I taking, you know, some other critical business service?
You want to be able to communicate to your end users what that impact is going to be.
And as a business, we want to know if I take that down, that's going to cost me £1 million an hour or something versus this is a test box somewhere else and no one cares about. So getting those business services in, even if they're in a rough way at the start, just get something in there, give some context to these things. And if possible, again, obviously automate it with service mapping and those kind of tools. But really just don't forget them. Make sure you keep those in there. And I think the last one then being kind of roles and responsibilities, the process owners, the configuration librarian, whoever's going to be maintaining these things on an ongoing basis. And if you're using the other tool in like Discovery as well, you know, credentials will change, firewall rules will change,
Yeah.
network routes will change, you know, so even when you put discovery in it, it's not going to just
It's
stay
that ongoing maintenance,
perfect
yeah.
forever.
Yeah.
You need someone looking at those dashboards, looking at those services. Are they all running okay? Is the CMDB healthy? Use the health dashboards.
And then being enabled to actually go ahead and introduce new subnets or you know, fix the errors that may come up.
I mean, introducing new stuff is a great example because you put it all in. If no one is checking that there's new stuff going in that needs to be discovered or captured, then you're back to having an out-of-date CMDB. Confidence goes, all the same problems we talked about. So, yeah. So I think another example of why CMDB is so crucial, if you look at the news, I guess, I mean, when outages, Facebook had a big outage this week, I think. You know, there's always these outages occurring, and I'm always thinking straight away when I see these outages, what tools are behind the scenes there? Are they mapped? Are they got a CMDB? Is this, and I'm sure a lot of these big companies are, but there's still obviously something amiss for these outages to take so long to fix. And I think if we look at things like the WannaCry attack last year and the NHS
security vulnerabilities, sure.
And I think the reason behind that was there was a certain machine that was vulnerable to that virus, a certain type of operating system that got attacked massively. And when they knew that, they didn't know where those machines were, which machines were running that software, where they were physically located. So they couldn't even go and fix it when they knew. Whereas having a CMDB with all that kind of stuff in, just hit the button, you know where it is. These days we can even have the tool deploy the patch or just create an alert and whatever. And I think companies really need to get up to speed now on these simple implementations can deliver
otherwise
massive
they're going to be
benefits.
dragged through the news.
Yeah, and the ideal benefit is the fact that you never end up on the news for one of these things. You know, it might be a silent benefit, but it's a benefit that comes with a lot of peaceful nights and happy times. Yes, I don't know about you, but I don't know if you think about some of the places you've worked in the past and maybe examples of, like, in quotes, you know, CMDBs is how they used to be and the impact of that. I'll talk about one specific one for me first of all. We were in a large kind of network services provider environment. The official CMDB, which was in the ITSM tool, was just a list of stuff. You know, the assets were supposedly all in there. There were always completeness issues and accuracy issues, but no relationship. So we used to have all these monitoring screens up. Someone would go red. It was like, okay, something's red. We're going to panic a little bit, maybe, depending on how much red there was. And really, though, there'd be no context. You know, sometimes we might know it's a core node, so something bad's in the core, but even then, who is affected? How bad is this? Are we affecting some critical services at the wrong time of day? Whatever. And we did come up with a spreadsheet. So one of my managers at the time, he was a great guy, and he did a really complex spreadsheet which attempted to map all the relationships in Excel. But you can imagine the effort that went into him putting that together. Us trying to drive it in the middle of an outage, because even with that, you could pick each core node individually, but not, like, say, 5 of them together. So you'd be still copy pasting information. You'd finally get this.
Keeping it up to date was an issue.
Keeping it up to date was never up to, it was never, again, accuracy issues, completeness issues, relying on people to update it. But even at that point, we had to notify our client within 15 minutes and then by email within an hour of who's affected specifically, and we'd have to email all of them directly. So even you'd get this list of nodes first of all from the spreadsheet, but then you'd figure out, okay, well, what are those nodes? Are they this client, that client? Then you'd finally get that, and then you'd be like, okay, what are the email addresses for these people? And you'd be in another tab of that spreadsheet then, clawing out all the right email addresses, and you know the whole process. It was a crazy process. And then you'd finally send it, and then you'd find out, you know, in the next day or two when the drain's up, that, you know, 2 people have complained because they didn't get notified, or you notified someone that wasn't affected, and you were constantly in this chasing your tail around trying to, you know, keep this up to date and do the best job you could. And we were really proud in that company. So we, you know, the guys on the ground with us, we really wanted to do that job well, and we took it quite, you know, personally when we couldn't get that data right all the time. But that was a painful lesson for me in the benefits of what a good CMDB looks like, and why. I always remember I went out to Brazil and saw their implementation in a company I was with of ServiceNow, actually, back in the early days of my experience with ServiceNow, a couple of years in, and it was like a different world. So everything was automated. Even this is 2011, 2012.
So compared to what you
events
were doing back
were automated. The knock was like a quarter of the size of ours because it was so efficient. But you could pick a CI and not only know who's affected, who supports it, but also you could trace it right back to the original sales meeting and purchase orders. And it was a real nice. I didn't expect it when I got there. But I came back with a lot of plans to change things and shake things up.
Cool.
So thank you for watching today. I hope you found these tips helpful and gave you some kind of clarity and ideas around getting the CMDB right. If you are embarking on a CMDB project and you feel like you need some help or even just some advice, please feel free to get in touch with us, hit flyform.com or look for us on LinkedIn, and we'll be more than happy to help.